U-534 was a Type IXC-40 U-boat, one of the most robust models unveiled by Nazi Germany's Kriegsmarine. This version was a modification of the original Type IX series and was yet another improvement in the remarkable trajectory of U-boat engineering. They were designed for endurance and to operate far from home ports. This allowed them to attack Allied vessels in distant naval theaters of war. The 9C-40 could go even further than its predecessors, up to 13,850 nautical miles or 25,650 kilometers, at a very respectable 10 knots. This impressive range was courtesy of additional fuel tanks in its aft section. She was also fast for a submarine of her era, able to reach speeds of up to 18.3 knots or 21 miles per hour. She was 252 feet or 76.8 meters in length, making her slightly longer than the original Type 9C class. This was so that the aforementioned additional fuel tanks could be accommodated, making the U-534 easily able to reach the Indian Ocean via South Africa's Cape of Good Hope or the Pacific Ocean via Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America. This U-boat was 19.7 feet or 6.86 meters in width and 31.5 feet or 9.6 meters in height. Her displacement of 1,144 tons at surface and 1,257 tons when submerged was a reflection of how big she was. She could withstand plunging to depths of up to 755 feet or 230 meters courtesy of her hull, which was constructed of high tensile steel. However, she would seldom be taken to those depths, so as to allow her to break surface quickly and also to lessen the risk of damage to her frame. Two 9-cylinder, 4-stroke MAN M 9V 4046 supercharged diesel engines powered her along. These engines were not only powerful, but very reliable and efficient. Once again, that was a design feature which enabled her to go greater distances when needed. The U-534 could also run on two Siemens-Schuckert electric motors, which were a lot more silent than diesel engines. This made her perfect for stealthing enemy vessels at close proximity. In terms of armaments, U-534 had 6 torpedo tubes on board, with 4 located at the bow and 2 aft, and she could accommodate 22 torpedoes. She also carried a 105mm deck gun, as well as an anti-aircraft 37mm flat gun and 20mm flat cannon. An interesting technological feature of the 9C-40 class U-boat was its Pillenwerfer. This was a chute just above the propeller shaft on its starboard side from which an anti-sonar decoy could be deployed. This decoy was called Bold, nicknamed after Kobold, a mythical sprite or goblin in German folklore. The decoy released calcium hydride, which made a flurry of bubbles when it came into contact with seawater. This would create a false reading on an enemy's sonar. Deutsche Werft AG, a large shipyard in Hamburg, was the site of U-534's build. The shipyard was at the forefront of advanced techniques in U-boat construction. It was also by then under constant air attack by the Allies. Even so, U-534 was laid down on September 20th, 1941, and launched a year later on September 23, 1942. She finally entered into active service on December 23, 1942, under the command of Captain Lieutenant Herbert Nollau. Once commissioned, U-534 undertook a prolonged period of rigorous training trials in the Baltic Sea. This stretch of water north of Germany was the Kriegsmarine's principal training ground as it was relatively safe from Allied attacks. By that time, Poland and Denmark, both of which bordered the Baltic, were under German occupation, while Sweden was neutral. That allowed new U-boats and their inexperienced crews relative freedom to hone important skills, such as navigation, diving, and the firing of torpedoes and other munitions. U-534 finally left the large naval base at Kiel for her first patrol on June 6, 1943. By then, the Allies had become far more effective in countering attacks by U-boats. For one thing, most Allied merchant shipping traveled in large convoys, nearly always escorted by a number of cruisers and other military ships. For another, Allied radar and sonar technology had greatly improved. Furthermore, the Allies were making greater use of long-range aircraft to patrol and protect convoys. U-534 had a distinctly weak record in terms of hitting or sinking enemy vessels. However, this was mostly by design. Her first and second patrols involved reconnaissance for intelligence gathering regarding Allied shipping. She also laid a number of mines around the coast of West Africa, including near the port of Freetown of what was then British-ruled Sierra Leone. Freetown was a major staging area for Allied convoys between Africa and Britain, as well as convoys bound for South America and the South Atlantic. During her first patrol, she suffered from oil leaks and bad weather in the North Atlantic. Things came to a head on August 13, 1944, when she was attacked overhead by two British Halifax bombers. Although the German sub was able to inflict serious flak damage on both bombers, which were forced to retreat. During her second patrol, U-534 suffered serious exhaust gas leaks inside, which caused a number of her crew to collapse. As such, she was forced to break surface on August 27, 1944, and was spotted by a Wellington bomber of the RAF's No. 172 Squadron, which immediately started firing on the U-boat. The crew of U-534 immediately retaliated with a barrage of anti-aircraft fire, which sent the British bomber crashing into the sea. She arrived back in Kiel and underwent an extensive refit that rendered her inoperative for over 6 months. Finally, she was ready to venture out again on May 2, 1945, which made her the last U-boat to leave a German port before Germany's surrender. Her destination was Kristiansand in Norway. Her exact mission, however, was unknown and would be the cause of much fervent speculation for decades to come. By early 1945, it was clear that Nazi Germany was losing the war. Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker on April 30th, and by May 5th, the Nazi leadership was preparing for surrender. As a result, many German U-boats started surrendering to the Allies by May 4th, while a large number were being purposefully scuttled by their crews. The latter was part of the Kriegsmarine's Operation Regenbogen, which had purportedly been demanded by Hitler himself before he took his life. You can check out a fascinating video we did on this channel regarding all the drama around Operation Regenbogen, or Operation Rainbow as it's known in English. However, Captain Lieutenant Wilhelm Nollau of U-534 chose to neither surrender his boat nor scuttle it. The reason why he made that decision remains one of the biggest mysteries of the dying days of the Battle of the Atlantic. Some historians believe he may not have received the orders to surrender his boat, or then return to Kiel for it to be scuttled. However, that is highly improbable. On the night of May 5, 1945, U-534 was cruising in the Kattegat, which is a 30,000 square kilometer area of sea bounded by Denmark's Jutland to the west, the Danish Straits and Baltic Sea to the south, and southern Sweden at its eastern boundary. It was in the middle of the Kattegat, still making its way to Norway, when U-534 was attacked by a British Liberator bomber from RAF Squadron 547. The British bomber had its powerful lee lights on, precisely so it could sweep the sea for U-boats on its anti-submarine patrol. The Liberator spotted U-534 at surface and released a barrage of depth charges at the German submarine. The U-boat took a direct hit from one of the depth charges. The boat started flooding immediately and became inoperable as it lost stability. Nollau quickly ordered his crew to abandon ship as it was obvious the sub was too badly hit. Of the 53 crew on board, 3 were killed due to the explosion on board. The rest of the crew had managed to abandon their submarine as they watched U-534 quickly sink beneath the waves. And so, U-534, on only its third mission, sank to the seabed of the Kattegat. Almost as soon as she went down, the rumors regarding U-534 went into overdrive. This was especially exacerbated by the fact that Captain Nollau had seemingly ignored orders to either surrender or scuttle his boat. The rumors only got wilder with the passing years. Many were convinced that U-534 was on a secret mission, and that Norway was only a stopping point along a far greater journey. We should remember that U-534 boasted a large range and, as many have speculated, could have easily reached South America. There was wild speculation that a whole loot of Nazi gold, paintings, and other valuables had gone down with her. Intriguingly, it transpired that one of the crew who died was an Argentinian wireless operator. What was an Argentinian radio specialist doing on board a German U-boat, especially at the end of the war? It seems that only Captain Lieutenant Wilhelm Nollau knew the exact answer to that question. and so U-534 lay untouched and unseen in her watery grave for just over 4 decades. That changed in 1986. It was that year when the wreck of U-534 was discovered by Danish wreck hunter Age Jensen. He discovered the U-boat some 12 nautical miles or 22.2 kilometers off the coast of Anholt Island, which lies in the Kattegat Strait. Jensen and his team, using advanced sonar equipment, identified the unmistakable outline of the U-boat, which was lying at a depth of about 220 feet or 67 meters. Yet a salvage operation was only mounted in 1993, mostly because the cost of it would be so huge. That finance for the salvage operation was provided by the Danish publisher and entrepreneur Karsten Ree. It was a technically challenging undertaking, requiring specialized marine salvage equipment and expertise. The salvage operation itself was undertaken by the Dutch firm Smit Tak. The operation lasted nearly 4 weeks with close cooperation by the Dutch Navy. Heavy-duty lifting straps were placed underneath the submarine's hull, to which they were connected to a large floating crane. The hoisting of the U-boat was a slow and laborious process, with the constant threat of the lifting straps breaking. That alone could have caused damage, even irreparable destruction to the sub. The salvage team were stunned at what they saw when U-534 finally emerged from under the waves after 41 years. She was remarkably well preserved, even after the damage to her from the explosion, not to mention all those years underwater. The excitement among the Dutch and Danish salvagers was palpable. Rusted and battered though she was, U-534 was basically intact. 5 tons of explosives, which could still blow at any moment, had to be first removed before U-534 could be moved to Grenaa, a small seaport on the east coast of Denmark's Jutland region. An initial phase of preservation was undertaken at Grenaa. The submarine had been relatively protected by years of being in a cold, low-oxygen environment on the seabed. Exposure to ambient air would result in rapid deterioration. Efforts focused on getting salt residues off the submarine, as the excess would result in accelerated corrosion of the vessel's metal. As for its contents, was there anything else besides explosives found on U-534? Well, there were Enigma encryption machines, which interestingly had not been destroyed. There were also nearly 2 tons of documents on board U-534. But there were no priceless paintings, no gold, no precious jewels, no piles of Reichsmarks money. U-534 was eventually loaded onto a huge barge and towed all the way to the port at Birkenhead, which sits across from Liverpool on the River Mersey on the northwest coast of England. Initially, U-534 started its life as a museum boat at Birkenhead at the U-boat story attraction, which was run by the Warship Preservation Trust. Unfortunately, the trust went bankrupt in 2006, which led to U-534 being acquired by the Merseyside Maritime Museum and relocated to Woodside Ferry. A decision was then made that horrified many U-boat purists. U-534 would be cut into 5 sections, which today is in 4 sections. It was done so that conservation efforts could be more effective. However, the main purpose of cutting the sub into sections was to make it into a more compelling and immersive experience for visitors to the exhibition. They could easily walk through and between the different compartments in a way that wasn't possible inside an intact submarine. Visitors to the U-534 exhibition certainly get a feel for the layout and machinery inside the sub, not to mention the cramped living and working quarters that crewmen had to endure. Personal items recovered from the submarine, including uniforms, personal effects, letters, and diaries, are also on display. These provide visitors with the human face to what was once the working and living environment of a feared and hated enemy. The sense of claustrophobia is very real, and some people have commentated how visitors today can only wonder at the sacrifices these men had to make, something almost unimaginable to modern people. Nevertheless, many feel that U-534 has been butchered by being cut into sections. Ownership of U-534 transferred to Big Heritage in October 2021, which operates the Western Approaches Museum in Liverpool. It was there on March 30th, 2023, that gramophone records from onboard U-534 were played for the first time in 78 years. The sounds of Bach's Air on the G-string, Schubert's Winterreise and Strauss's Künstlerleben filled the air. Museum staff members were overcome with the poignancy of the moment. In its own unique way, U-534 continues to live on. It turned out to be a special U-boat after all,